Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the afternoon session. I'm Ewan McDonald, one of the Deputy Director Generals at AusAid, and I'd like to firstly very much welcome the Honourable Ministers and distinguished guests to this third plenary session. And it is a pleasure to be chairing this session alongside some pioneers in the field, who I will introduce shortly. In this session, we will explore the different ways mining impacts on men and women and how we can ensure that the benefits of mining are shared equitably with both women and men in affected communities. Of course, Australia is a persistent advocate and practical supporter of gender equality and has identified gender as a cross-cutting issue of the aid program. And reflecting this, just last year, the Prime Minister announced the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development Initiative, a $320 million program that will expand women's leadership and economic social opportunities across the Pacific. In AusAid, I've been appointed as a gender advocate, and I'm also our Indigenous champion, and this particular session is of great interest to me. So in this session, one of the things we'd like to try and do is give you the opportunity to have some interaction and discussion with the panel, and I know you'll be pleased about that. But some of the questions I think we should keep in mind are: how can we ensure that the benefits of mining are shared equitably between women and men? How can we ensure women have the opportunity to play an active and meaningful role in mining decisions that impact their family, community and country? And how do we involve women in the sector, create opportunities for women-owned businesses and encourage more and better paid employment for women in the mining industry? My distinguished panellists bring a great deal of expertise and depth to this discussion, and it's my pleasure now to introduce them. Firstly, Ms. Katie Heller is a specialist in social and community development around the extractive industries for the World Bank, and has a focus on how oil, gas and mining differently impact men and women. Her experience in the sector spans Africa, Asia and the Caribbean, including Madagascar, Tanzania, Mongolia, Papua New Guinea and Trinidad and Tobago. Her expertise includes work on the gendered aspects of operations and benefit sharing, capacity building and local supply chain development, and participatory monitoring of the public and private sectors. Katie is an author and contributor to numerous publications on the corporate community interface in the extractive sector and on gender in the extractive industries. She recently developed a toolkit on the gender dimensions of small-scale mining and will soon release a publication on gender considerations in the oil and gas sector. So can you please join with me and welcome Katie to speak with us.
Thanks very much for that. I should have updated that. This publication on gender dimensions of the oil and gas sector, actually I picked up on my way to the airport, so I have a number of copies in case anybody's interested. So it's very recently come out. Let's see. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm really excited to be on this panel. I think there's a lot of really interesting expertise here, so I'm interested in where this conversation goes, and in the interest of it turning into a conversation more than just presentations, I'll try and keep my contribution fairly short. I've been asked to give a general overview of the sector, so I'm torn between throwing in everything but the kitchen sink and keeping it short enough that we have some time for questions and discussion. Let's see if this, okay. So, as I said, I've been asked to give an overview of the sector, which in 10 minutes is going to be a bit of a trick. But I wanted to start with how we in the bank started thinking about the gender dimensions of the extractive industries. And I should say, Graham probably can speak better to this even than I can. This, I should say, predates my involvement with the bank. But in 2001, during community consultations around mining in PNG, they were holding consultations and noticed that while there were many women who participated in the consultation, they were there, they weren't speaking. and they were the first to show up. They were clearly very interested in what was happening, but they weren't actively participating. And so my bank colleagues ultimately took them aside and said, we really want to hear what you have to say. It's really important to us that you participate. And the women said, we have lots to say, but we're not going to say it in this context. This just isn't an appropriate forum. We're not going to speak in a men and women together context. So if you organize something separately, for us, we have lots to say and lots to contribute. And so that's what they did. They organized a separate Women in Mining conference and created a women's-only space where they could listen to the stories that these women had to tell. And what they found was quite surprising in that the women had a totally different experience. They noticed different impacts, different opportunities, different social, environmental, economic, health, a whole range of different perspectives that really hadn't been captured before that. So this led to the creation of a Women in Mining program, which I'll come back to. This was, I think the first conference was in 2003, and I'll come back in the end of my presentation to where we are now. But that was how this sort of light bulb went off, that by not consulting with women and not making a special emphasis on hearing what women have to say, that we may be missing both part of the picture on what are the impacts and also opportunities for what to do going forward. And I think if there's anything that I'd like you to take away from this presentation, it's that by failing to incorporate women in both how we understand the social, environmental, economic implications of the mining sector and the impacts, we're both getting only half a picture of what's going on, but also just half the picture on what we can do, and we're really missing out on key perspectives on how to move forward and how to make sure that we're ensuring that the extractive industries really benefit the whole community and the whole country. So, in a very quick nutshell, what are we talking about in terms of the gendered impacts? Being from the bank, my main wheelhouse is really working with governments on what are the community impacts, how are the extractive industries impacting communities and national development. So it's less focused on women involved in the employment in the sector, but I want to touch briefly on that. I think many of us know that men and women seem to have unequal access to jobs. Men typically have a greater access to jobs directly related to the sector, although women seem to have a higher representation in related and secondary industries around the extractives. In terms of employment conditions themselves, when women are hired, often we found in our surveys that the employment conditions are less conducive to women's employment. So often shifts are more difficult for women, often facilities are sort of aren't gender disaggregated or gender sensitive. Uniforms, we find instances of sexual harassment. The employment conditions are often create challenges for women. We also find unequal access and information when it comes to employment. So finding out about job opportunities, having the necessary training to be involved in job opportunities, finding out about procurement opportunities, and having the necessary social networks and social capital to take advantage of related employment. In terms of community impacts, I think many of us here are probably aware of how mining changes the social landscape of a community. As Ume mentioned this morning, changes in migration patterns create stresses on families. Changes in income patterns create new spending patterns, new opportunities, and new costs. And some of these also create changing health issues, which, while the health issues may impact men and women, women are often in the social role of caretakers. So changing health impacts often mean a greater burden on women who need to take care of their families, be responsible for health care. We see an unequal distribution of benefits. That may be in terms of financial benefits. Men often have greater access to the consultations, have land tenure that gives them more access to land compensation. Often they're involved in the conversation about benefits and women are not, based on the social roles and opportunities to engage in consultation. As we saw in PNG, if you have a consultation with men and women may be there but may not be able to participate. So looking at who actually gets the benefits, even if they're meant to go to a community, how do they actually get down to the family level? We often see a real gender bias there. we often see as one of the main benefits of mining is rising income, rising access to jobs. But who gets those jobs? Is it men and women? Often where we may see a rising number of jobs, those jobs may go to men, meaning that the income goes to men, which may not mean that it gets all the way back to the community and to the family. In terms of environmental impacts, we also see a gender dimension here. Again, this is something that it's tempting to look at it and see an environmental impact as an environmental impact, but actually there's often significant gender dimensions to that. If women are in charge of accessing, collecting fuel and food and water, and if the extractive sector changes access to those things, it's women who are often disproportionately affected in terms of needing to change their daily schedules, change their time allocation to adapt to those changes. Changing livelihoods, we may see a shift away from agrarian lifestyles, which may be countered by an increased access to jobs for men, but women also often may not have access to those jobs, so they may lose a job but not gain a job. We also see changing dimensions of conflict, security, vulnerability, which often have serious impacts on men and women, with often unique gender dimensions. And I think one of the issues that was brought up this morning, and one of the most significant issues, is access to consultations, and consultations which both give companies and governments a sense of the impacts, create opportunity to negotiate for benefits, facilitate discussion around how community resources are going to be allocated, and where men and women have unequal access to participate in those consultations and negotiations, we see a real impact in how men and women benefit. We often are tempted to think that if a community representative is present, that that's going to translate into equal benefits back in the community, but we know that's not the case. In looking at all of these are really symptoms, and I think something that as we move forward and try and think how to combat these issues, it's important to understand that there are structural challenges that underpin these issues. So how are men and women involved in consultations? What underpins that culturally and socially about men and women's ability to participate in a consultation? Who has access to land? How is land passed down? Who has land tenure? Who has access to social networks, social capital? How are those changing in an extractive context? A lot of these aren't just the symptoms of changing environment, changing health and social issues, but we need to look at what are the social structures that underpin men's and women's ability to respond and adapt to those changes. I'll go quickly. These are just a few opportunities that we see in our work for adapting and addressing some of these issues. So at a most basic level in our work, where we're working with governments, for instance, one of our key challenges and opportunities is to work with governments on a policy framework, looking at how the policy and regulatory environment understands and addresses the challenges that men and women face. And what I would say to companies, to governments, and to civil society is the importance of a gender analytical lens. So in everything we do, we're trying to encourage governments, companies, civil society, think about gender in whatever you're doing. Not just assuming that a community impact and a community survey is sufficient, but really breaking down, disaggregating by gender, creating opportunities for men and women to be consulted separately, independently, and to really look at the information provided by men and provided by women to understand what's going on in a community. To provide access to jobs, proactive recruitment of women. So not just, I think I often hear a job has been created, it's equally accessible, we encourage men and women to apply, but is that enough? When you think about these structural challenges, do women have access to the training that they need to get these jobs? Do they have access to the information about these jobs? Where are they posted? How are they made available? Same goes for procurement as well. Are women's networks and women's associations being given the training, being given the opportunities, and being given the information to actually capitalize on those sorts of opportunities? We try and provide quite a bit of support to women's businesses related to the extractive sector. As Ume mentioned, some of it is in sewing and baking. We're also trying to provide more responsive skills building to give women real opportunities in the sector, more technical skills. To address the social and environmental impacts and identify opportunities for investment, I'd love to be able to give a silver bullet there. That's sort of the catch-all. But really what we found the most effective thing is listening constructively, creating opportunities for women to be heard independently, to really understand what's going on among men and women, and tailoring programs directly to those needs. To increase women's involvement in local resource governance, to give them a chance to be a part of negotiations, benefit sharing, consultation. In PNG, we've been involved in building women's networks, PNG, Tanzania, DRC, creating women's associations at local levels and national levels to help them share information and build the social empowerment to be a part of those conversations. It's also critical to create space for women's representation in discussions. The role that Ume played, for instance, in the Octedi negotiations, to have an advocate for women who could access a women's network and really be a part of that negotiation to create dedicated resources for women is critical. And building a strong voice for women, building capacity for these networks, providing training all along the value chain from basic literacy and numeracy to skills development, to creating opportunities to participate in discussion at all levels. So it's really not just a responsive reaction to what's going on in the sector, but really looking at how to create empowerment among women to give them equal opportunities to participate at all levels. And finally, just a very quick look at some of the interventions that the bank is doing. Some of our most prominent work on gender in mining has been in Papua New Guinea, Uganda, Tanzania, and DRC. In PNG, which I think may be the most relevant here, and which is a program that I'm currently working on and very proud of having taken over from my colleague Adriana Eftimi, who may be known to some of you. It's being executed through support from the Japanese government, through ExxonMobil, and through the World Bank. We are building voice, social capital, and access to information through local and national women's networks, women in mining action plans, through a national 5-year action plan that we've worked with the government on, and supporting national women in mining conferences. And we're also building social capital and economic assets through training programs around literacy, numeracy, microbusiness development, small business development. And finally, in a program that we're about to launch, we're trying to target really some of these structural challenges that I mentioned by working on gender-based violence, working with men and women on gender-based violence, and working on adolescent girls' empowerment. So we're trying to really change some of or work with some of the social structures upstream, if you will, to try and improve women's ability to engage in some of these processes further on down the line. So, that was a super brief overview, but.
Thank you, Katie. I think you did exceptionally well, and we are pushing the panellists a bit to make sure we get some discussion with you. So I'd now like to introduce Ume Wanetti, who presented earlier today, and just to reiterate that Une was previously working in the Prime Minister's Office, Women's Program Officer. She's also been a social worker and counsellor in the Department for Community Development, and she was the women's representative on the Octedi compensation negotiations in 2007. And I understand, Ume, you brought your own unique style of negotiations to those negotiations. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ume. Thank you, Ume.
I am not going to bore you again with what I said this morning, but I'd like to bring to you the plight of women when we do not involve them in negotiations and planning. Today, when you go to the Fly River, you'll meet women who will tell you that they wake up in the morning and they wonder what they will eat with their families, because they can't harvest food out from the environment. They'll tell you that the flying foxes do not come home anymore because their breadfruit trees have died. They'll tell you that the coconuts are turning yellow, not bearing fruit properly. You know, I was at Canberra on Thursday. And I saw all these trees, leaves that are yellow. And I asked David, are your trees dying? Because that's what I see in Western Province, in the impacted areas, that the trees are dying. And I thought the same thing was happening in Canberra. So that's the sort of plight of women. The huge swamps from which they used to harvest fish and all sorts of things to feed themselves don't exist anymore. Nobody consulted us that the tailings go into the Fly River, and we didn't realize that this would happen to our environment. But that is what is happening. Now, nobody, since the mine was open, and there are people from Western Province here and also from the mining sector, will tell you that our children have not made it to tertiary educations. So they cannot, because in mining, you have to go to school, but you have to have grades that will enable you to acquire the skills that you need to acquire to have a job with a mine. And many of our children cannot do that. Especially our girls have not made it. And many a times we are told that, or we tell them that this is good for them and they don't do it. And that's because we believe that this is how I should be as a woman. And if I have to change, there needs to be a lot of advocacy work done for women's mindset to change, for them to advance where they need to go. The other thing that we see, I was telling you about MCH programs that we want to see run there. And that's because our women are still giving birth in the rural areas. And many of them, Papua New Guinea, have a high death rate. And that's because of our women who are dying, can't have access to health services. And they're dying from preventable things that can be medically prevented today. They're dying from that. And that's all to do with consultation. When we are not consulted, people assume that this is what women want. And so it's taught to them. Like when I went to the villages, I was told, because companies do have community development programs. But the community development programs, I believe, are developed to make people happy to continue, to let the mine to continue to operate. It is not really designed to help the people. So one thing I'd like us to, from here to look at is, what is it we should really look at? What strategies do we need to look at to encourage women to come out from where they are to take advantage of what is being offered to them? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ume. I'd now like to introduce Helen Soak, who was appointed to the role of Chief Executive Officer of Oxfam Australia in November last year. She previously served as Australia's Federal Race Discrimination Commissioner, following 7 years with the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. She's currently co-chair of Play by the Rules, a board member of Multicultural Arts Victoria, and a member of the Advisory Committee for the Centre for International Mental Health, School of Population Health, University of Melbourne. In 2011, Helen was awarded the Law Institute of Victoria Paul Baker Award for her contribution to human rights. She also has extensive experience in management, community development, organisational development and regulation in the education and health sectors. Please join with me in welcoming Helen.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and to pay respects to elders past and present, and to also acknowledge many of you who've travelled a long way to get to this really important conference. and to thank you, May, for the challenge that you've just issued to all of us in relation to the participation of women. What's clear in all of the presentations to date is that gender is a critical issue for the mining sector, and unless gender issues are given proper consideration, mining won't continue to be sustainable and equitable, which is what we want in terms of development. When we talk about gender, we of course talk about both men and women, but our work at Oxfam over many years has made it quite clear that the mining sector needs to focus much more on women, to heed Ume's plea that we need to think differently about how to engage women from different cultural backgrounds, different country backgrounds, to get their experience, their perspective, to understand their needs and their interests, and also to better engage women and support their participation in decision-making processes. We know the impacts of mining are not gender neutral. We know that, but women often experience more negative impacts of mining than men, and rarely receive the same extent of benefits that men do. In part, this is because the industry does not engage with women. I want to share with you an example from Mozambique, where one of our staff recently visited. And as I'm sure you're aware, and we've delighted over lunch to hear from the Minister for Mining from Mozambique, Mozambique is booming in terms of mining. The country is set to become one of the world's largest coal producers, with a large number of multinational companies exploring or extracting coal and other minerals. While a limited number of people are benefiting from mining, poverty prevails for the majority, and food security has become a serious issue. With so much land marked for minerals development and concessions frequently overlapping, the issues of where communities will live, what livelihoods they will have, and how they will develop from the rapid development, how they will benefit from the rapid development, is of critical importance. The mining sector as it currently operates is causing environmental degradation, community dislocation, loss of livelihoods, and also increased tensions in Mozambique. Mozambican women have told Oxfam of their experiences of mining, including the consequences of being resettled to land that typically is not suitable for growing much at all. As with many countries around the world, growing food is women's work. In Mozambique, this is the case, and women now struggle to provide food for their families. Many reported that their families are often hungry. Women have also lost economic opportunities that they previously enjoyed from being able to sell peanuts or sorghum and other produce at local markets. Even if the land that they've been moved to is suitable for farming, it's often too far for the markets for the women to be able to sell their produce. Sex work, violence against women, and alcohol-related violence are increasing at alarming rates in mining areas in Mozambique, no doubt due to the presence of a large transient male workforce. Women and girls have told us that they feel less secure and increasingly vulnerable to violence and intimidation. While communities in general are often locked out of resettlement negotiations, women are totally excluded. And it should be of little surprise then to hear that women in Mozambique also told us that they have no access to information about mining projects. What I have described is typical of an industry that fails to recognise that women have equal rights to men. This can be the case even when a company employs a woman's representative on its community relations staff, even when it provides funding to support women's organisations, or helps to establish small business opportunities for women. Unless initiatives such as these are implemented in response to a considered and consultative process, they may mask more fundamental outcomes and concerns. And this is Ume's point about why do we have community development and where does the impetus for that community development come? Just like men, women have rights to access to information, participate in decision-making that affects them, to a livelihood and to a life safe from harm and violence. And yet mining can undermine these and other rights. Too many companies see communities in which they operate as communities of men and fail to appreciate that the women in those communities have the same rights as men. This has got to change. Mining companies must engage with women at the outset of the proposed mining projects to avoid the negative impacts of mining on women, and also to identify opportunities to contribute to positive change in women's life. And if you think I'm not giving the mining industry due credit for good work that's being done, and some is, let me tell you that we've heard mining company staff themselves tell us that they have never even thought to speak to the women. Frankly, it's hard to fathom, given the negative impacts of mining and what impacts they have on women. So how can mining respect the rights and aspirations of women and be more gender responsive? To start, mining must reduce its impact on the environment. Women are often food producers for their families and are responsible for water and firewood collection. If fields and forests are destroyed and land and water is polluted, this affects women directly. They may need to walk further to collect water or firewood, increasing their workload. Further, because women are usually responsible for the care of children, if children get sick from pollution from mining and require special care, women's ability to engage in other activities, including livelihoods, is reduced. Women's access to information about mining, presence in public debates and participation in decision-making must be supported. Yet it must be acknowledged that these things can be difficult to achieve. Women's domestic roles and barriers to their participation in public arenas are challenges. Innovative approaches are required to overcome these challenges. To start, mining companies should acknowledge and support the effort of women themselves to decide how they should participate in public debates and decision-making processes. Gender impact assessment is one tool that companies can use to engage with women and men. Gender impact assessment can help remove the gender blindfold and give voice to women's perspectives, needs and interests, as well as to men's. A gender impact assessment allows companies to understand how their operations may impact on women and men, avoid these negative impacts, and also enable mining projects to be more responsive to women and men's needs and interests. A gender impact assessment could be done as a standalone process or part of the company's broader social, environmental and human rights impact assessment processes. Most companies will undertake an environmental and social impact assessment, yet unless these assessments properly consider issues of gender, that is, ask how the project will impact on women and impact on men, the assessment may not identify all the potential impacts. Oxfam's Guide to Gender Impact Assessment provides a framework to help mining companies undertake such an assessment. And I just briefly, in the time that I have left, want to outline the key elements of this framework. It should begin by collecting sex disaggregated data to understand who lives in the community, women and men, girls and boys, and to also understand factors such as poverty and other causes of vulnerability. Next, companies should understand women and men's roles and responsibilities and who has access to and control of resources in the community. Companies can then begin to consider the intersection of the changes to a community and its environment that may be introduced by a mining project, and women and men's roles and responsibilities and who has access to and control of resources. In other words, to identify the potential gender impacts of a mining project. Actions to avoid any negative impacts should then be developed, and with the input of potentially affected women and men. Gender impact assessment requires more than identifying and mitigating negative impacts on women and men. It should specifically ask, what are women's practical gender needs and strategic gender interests? In doing so, it can identify those things that may positively transform the lives of women. This requires a shift in thinking, but also a shift in action to move from being gender responsive to being potentially gender transformative. These impact assessments must support women's equal participation and control over mining-related decision-making processes, something that women often struggle to achieve. This can help ensure that the benefits of mining are equally enjoyed by both men and women and will support women's empowerment. There are copies of our Gender Impact Assessment Guide, which looks like that, outside, and we encourage you to take a copy as you leave today. But to conclude, there's significant scope for the industry to improve its approach to gender. In particular, women must be engaged in all aspects of mining. Women have equal rights, including to participate in community decision-making processes, to benefit from development, and to be safe from the potential negative impacts of mining. The first step requires mining companies to recognise that the communities in which they operate in are communities of both men and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Our last speaker is Mrs. Doris Eaton, who is the first woman elected as co-chair of Yamaji Melba Aboriginal Corporation's Board of Directors. YMAC, as it's known, is the native title representative body for the traditional owners of the Pilbara, Murchison and Gascoyne regions of Western Australia. Doris was announced Female Elder of the Year at the NAIDOC Awards in 2009, and as a leader in the Pilbara and a passionate advocate for women, Doris is an active force in improving her community. In addition to her chairperson role at YMAC, Doris is the chairperson of the Pilbara Native Title Service and the Pilbara Indigenous Women's Aboriginal Corporation. Doris is also an active mentor to young people in the community. She is passing on her cultural knowledge and leadership skills and encouraging young people to take up positions of responsibility. Please join me in welcoming Doris to the podium.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners from this area and acknowledge at Australia to bring me down here to share this information with everybody. But bear with me. This is the first time I'm speaking up here, including saying chairperson. It's not my area to sharing my information with everybody here. And I'm a bit nervous because this is the first time with the audience so many. It's different to having meeting in the Pilbara. Pilbara is having meeting with my people, and it's easier for me to speak there. But tell you now, I am a bit shaky, but bear with me. I'll share this information, and I hope with people from overseas, I hope we share the knowledge. It's about sharing, because we're all facing same issues across the board. Yamaji Melba Aboriginal Corporation is the native title representative body for the Murchison, Gascoyne and Pilbara region of Western Australia. This covers almost 1 million square kilometres. We provide legal representation, research and other professional service to 25 native title claim groups across our region. Our board is made of 12 traditional owners and 2 co-chairs, one from the Pilbara, one from the Yamaji region. I have been the chairperson since 2008. And also Yamaji mean Aboriginal person from Gascoyne Midwest. Marba mean Aboriginal people from the Pilbara. Over the last decade, decade, we have seen one of the largest mining booms in our history. Native title doesn't give us a veto on mining. It only provides the right to negotiate an agreement with mining companies and government. There are challenges and opportunities here. I can give you an example of how this played out on my own country. Nyamal and FMG's North Star project. Native title groups do not have equal negotiation power with mining companies. We had to fight hard to get a good agreement for the North Star project. When companies mine, they change country forever. This means we lose access to important culture, places, and the opportunity to pass this on to our children. You can see this is part where we're going to mine. And people have been walking 2,000 years, our ancestors. And today, like myself, the next generation, we still carry that on, and we're practicing our custom, mainly to keep our language going, and encouraging women to get up and speak, because we are very scared people, and we need to rise because the world's moving too fast. We need to capture our young generation, especially the young women's, to be a leader in today's life. It is very important that we receive compensation for the loss of our land and heritage. In the end, negotiation with FMG has resulted in a 50-50 joint venture partnership on the North Star project. We were also able to get stronger protection over important cultural areas that can't be touched. And you can see this is our two elders signing agreement on behalf of all the Nyamal groups. Our people are looking forward to being generous partners and creating jobs, security, and a positive future for our young people. This agreement will also provide a strong basic for our local corporation to grow, to build opportunity in areas outside of mining. Last year we had an opportunity to go out to the mine and look at this project from the air. And to provide jobs for our young people. But we were also looking at beautiful valleys where our old people walked, important ceremony and story places. This is our home to rare species of animals and plants. Soon this place will be mined and changed forever. Under native title, we can't stop this from happening, so we have to try and get the best we can out of this situation. In the past, Aboriginal women tend to provide strength and support in the background, looking after our family. But just like in other areas of life, like Gillian Gillard being PM, women are taking up leadership role in native title and need to be at the negotiation table firsthand. When women are involved in negotiation, we don't just focus on money and big business, we push hard to make sure there are a pathway for our young people to get health, education and good job for the futures. Yamaji Malba Aboriginal Corporation provide the legal representative and research to strengthen our position in the negotiation. WIMAC is also working with industry peak bodies like the Mineral Council of Australia and governments to shape policy and improve outcome for traditional owners all over Australia. It is important that women continue to speak up and feel support to take on leadership roles in their native title organisation. We know our families and their needs. It is important that we continue to have a say in our compensation from mining is used to change lives and build bright future for our next generation. Thank you.
Doris, and if that's the first time you've spoken in front of such a large group, you did a fantastic job, and I think you can do it a lot more in the future. So thank you very much for doing it for us. Okay, look, there's been some really good points made in each of those presentations, and you know, Katie sort of emphasising the fact that half the women aren't, if the women aren't involved, half the population's not involved. Therefore, you're not benefiting the whole country with the input of women into those things. I think Ume put the challenge out there around what strategies can be put in place to incorporate women into the decision-making process around mining. Helen talked about some of the barriers that women face and alluded to a gender impact statement and how that could play a role in this. And of course, Doris just put the challenge out there of some of the young people in her community. How do we get the young women, men involved in decision making as we go forward and take leadership roles in relation to mining for development? But I'd now like to open it for questions from the floor for our panellists. Where are we? Sorry, up the top there. Thank you. Can you just let us know where you're from, and please? Thank you.
I'm from Papua New Guinea, and my question is directed to Helen from the World Bank. Is it?
Katie.
Katie, sorry, from the World Bank.
Yeah.
How much of the energy that you're showing in this program, how much of it is being absorbed by industry? And is industry really serious?
I don't know which, okay, that works. Sorry, when you say how much is being absorbed by the industry, you mean how much are they taking the lessons on?
Yeah, how much are they putting in? I mean, how much is it? How much time and effort are they putting into translating what you're doing into their own agenda?
I should say I'm fairly new working on PNG, so my interactions, I'm just sort of getting going on these projects. But from what I've seen so far, we're working closely with the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, which is an industry association, and they're our main implementers for a number of the programs. So it's really being taken up by the industry in that sense, in that they're very involved in the implementation of, of a program that's being, a new program that's being funded by the Japanese government. Also, ExxonMobil has been supporting work that we're doing for capacity building for women in areas around their operations. And actually, I think that represents a big commitment from them. They've basically given us funding under an arrangement where they give funding and the bank does the work. So Exxon, it's actually, to me, it reflects a real commitment from them. They don't get any attribution other than what I'm giving them right now. They've said, we see this needs to be done. We really want to support it. We think the bank has methods to do that, and we really want to see it done in the best possible way. So I think both in terms of companies putting their money where their mouth is, we're seeing that, and in terms of the industry association being very involved in wanting to learn the methods so that they can pass it to their shareholders, we see that. So I think it's a positive step. I think there's a lot to do, and I think that what we're hearing from Ume particularly emphasizes that there's still a really long way to go, but I do see really positive signs there from industry.
Just to follow up to that, sorry if I may. Yes. How much of this has also been translated in the government's policy?
That's a good question. I think I'm still learning on that side, but I mean, we're working closely with the government of PNG, and actually, sorry, let me back up. I should say I think it's being really strongly incorporated by the government. The Women in Mining Action Plan, all of these Women in Mining conferences, these are all done through the government, through our project with the government. So the 5-year action plan, the local women in mining committees, the National Women in Mining Technical Committee, I think it actually represents a really strong commitment from the government to see it at the local level, to see it at the national level. I think a really innovative thing that the government there has done is to create this Women in Mining Technical Committee, which is an interdepartmental committee. So it's actually recognizing that while a lot of the impacts that we see on women through the mining sector, we can address them through the mining sector, but also we need to bring in health and education and all of these different departments in order to really tackle these issues most effectively. So I think it's being really well understood, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for making this a national priority, actually quite uniquely in the world, I think.
Thank you, Cody. We have one more question up there, yep.
My name is Charles and I'm Kenyan. I just wanted to pose a question to the Oxfam representative. Listening to the speech from the Minister for Mining during our lunch hour, she painted a very rosy picture of what is going on in Mozambique. And listening to what you've just told us right now, sounds like there is a very big disconnect between what the people think, what women are going through, and what she presented. My question to you is, did you find time to share your learnings or your findings with the government, and what did they do? The second question I have is for the ma'am from PNG. You've worked in the policy area, you've worked on the ground, and you have extensive understanding of what the issues are. I'm just wondering whether you have shared all that with the top government to see whether women can be empowered to own land and so therefore be in the mainstream in terms of decision making, and if you have, what are the outcomes?
Okay, thank you. So Helen, would you like to respond first?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question. Obviously, Oxfam working in Mozambique does work very much at that community level, and the model, I guess, that in terms of what our contribution is to listen, to bring expertise, to bring capacity, and in a sense to help the local civil society organisations to raise their voice and to bring these issues to the government's attention. In a sense, part of, I guess, what underlies this is the importance of working with communities, not doing things for them, and facilitating part of that process of how they become empowered, how they are able to undertake the advocacy. Our work is very much at that local level. The Minister has a very aggregated view, I guess, and a long-term view of the benefits of mining in Mozambique. Our hope is that by working with local groups, they can continue to bring these issues up through their representative structures to local agencies, to government agencies, to, in a sense, own some of the processes of gaining solutions, as well as having a place to play in terms of identifying some of the problems. And I think that is a more sustainable, if we talk about the transformative role that can be played, then it has to be about communities actually being empowered to raise those concerns on their own behalf.
Thank you, Helen. Ume, would you like to respond to the second question around inputting the learnings you've got back into the government system in PNG? Is that the second question? The microphone? Yep, thank you.
My second question was basically listening to Ma'am's presentation in the morning and the brief one that she had. It's obvious that she's very experienced both at government level in terms of policy and at the ground level in terms of understanding all the dynamics that women go through. So my question was, if you understand what women at the ground level go through, have you ever had discussions with the top government leadership about the possibility of empowering women? And if you have, what was the outcome?
It was one thing to be at the negotiation and to represent women as a local woman. After the negotiations, I was no longer part of it. Even though there was an understanding that I would continue to play an advisory role for the implementation, that did not happen. And we have also, to make sure that women's voices are also heard, we have, through the National Council of Women, established within the organic law and provincial government, women appointed into provincial assembly, into LLGs, and into ward committees. Unfortunately, our women there have not been empowered to represent women as they should. So there is big vacuum there. It's like we have placed a bird with mouth but no hands and legs to move with to do things for women. And so that needs to be looked at to help representation at that level to make a difference for women. I have been through the work that I do as gender advocating and creating awareness for women. But unfortunately, there are a lot of Papua New Guinean men sitting here, and we don't have that sort of support yet at national level for women's advancement. Like we were pushing for the reserve seats, and now our Prime Minister says that we got 3 women elected, so now we can put that on hold. We don't have to do anything about it. So that's the sort of thing. And also, like, you advocate with Paul. Paul agrees with what you're doing. It's not an overall understanding of gender issues. You advocate with Paul, and tomorrow Paul's now moved on. Now there's Peter. You have to lobby with Peter, educate Peter again to help you. That's what it's like. The Papua New Guinean who's sitting next to you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ume. There's 3 questions I've got. I'm going to take the 3 questions and then we're going to have a break. Okay, so there's a question just in the front here, please.
Hello, I'm Patricia Kila from Papua New Guinea, from PNG Sustainable Development Program Limited, which is a major shareholder of Octedi. So I just want to throw a question to Ume, if she can, in the time that we've given, if she can, she's a bit too modest, if she can give some experiences on the fact that the impacted women in the corridor of Octedi's impact corridor have been specified an allocation of about minimum of 10% of the benefits package from the 2007 MOA. And I think that's, that's setting a benchmark, so to speak, for women being able to sit at the negotiation table and also negotiating for more than 10% in the mine life extension negotiations that have just been completed. And so I just wanted to ask her if she can give some of those experiences, because she is the one that pioneered that 10%. At least that's probably one rare agreement in PNG where women receive benefits directly.
Thank you.
And can sit at the negotiation table.
Thank you. Ume?
Yeah. Negotiation with, when it was actually a review of the CMCAs, and our women there were no women at all. There was a clergy woman who was there, and so there was an understanding amongst men that they were enough to represent our women. And I was only asked, not so much as women from Western Province, but Institute of National Affairs was approached to ask for a woman from there to go to represent women's issues. And they said that I would be a consultant. I thought, good, now I'm going to make money. So I went and What happened was I arrived and I was with my own people. Now they said, you sit with them, you're one of them. So all that style idea I had about being a consultant went out the window. I was just one of them. And like I said this morning, I am from Dudi Trust. My uncle is the chairman of the trust. And these are my mother's people. And so it was very easy for me to fit into their way of thinking. And it meant educating our men there on gender issues, educating them to understand why they should help. And because we claim to be Christian country, even though we kill a lot of women, a lot of Christian teachings were used. I would make them sing choruses and I'd sing louder than them because I was the only one there, so they must hear my voice. So we would sing choruses. And one thing I noticed there was that maybe because I was one of them, and many of the men who were there at the negotiation tables went to high school with me, so maybe they had respect for me because of that association. I was the one who screamed at them most of the time. There was no screaming back at me. Yeah. And that was unusual for Papa, because when other women came, and Pat will say this, they actually stood up and said, she's not a woman leader, we don't want her here. But when I was there, even though I was the only woman there beside the female reverend who was there representing churches, there was no screaming and shouting. There was a lot of respect for me being there. Even though the consultants who were there to help us through the process didn't believe that I would be able to represent my people there. In the end, they changed their minds. We didn't ask for too much, even though there were suggestions to me. And it also meant those of us who were at negotiating tables and with advisors and people like it also means looking at and really deciding what is in the best interest for you and what you're comfortable with, because we understand our people. Like a lot of people said, why don't you ask for 20%? If I asked for, because I knew that our men's minds were working around money. How much money? If we agree to this, how much will we give them? And so I had to go for 10%, asking them for 10%. And just before I put that proposal to them, we sang a chorus that was asking God for help. And so when I was presenting, I said to them, in the chorus we ask God for help, but in our culture, we women come to you to ask our brothers to help us. So we are asking you to help us. And we had men who I was told by our women who were there that they will not listen to you. These were the men I went to, and I asked them, I would discuss my proposals with them and ask them to support me, to push them through. And these were the people who helped me to push them through. I wouldn't have done it without the help of the men who are sitting around that table. But it meant educating them. Sometimes it gets emotional because I had witnessed women dying. I traveled to rural areas and a woman died because the placenta has been retained, or she was left on her own on the other side and there was nobody other side of the lake, and so nobody with her and she's lost her child, things like that. So, pushing for, that's why I kept talking about MCH, because a lot of our women are suffering because of that, and family planning things that need to be done. Yeah, so it wasn't easy asking for scholarships for our women. The scholarships are there, our women are not taking full advantage of that. So a lot of things, opportunities are there provided through this now, but enforcing it and women to rise up now and participate is another thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ume. Rebecca, just here. Thank you. But this question and we'll have a break.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Bryant from AusAid. A question for Doris, if I may. Doris, what would you like to see your government do to better support the young people in your community, to help ensure that your community does get the benefits from the mining activity that it deserves?
What I like to see, because amongst us Aboriginal people, we've got policy through our law and custom, and government got their own policy as well. They're talking about changing and closing the gap. Government can't close gaps. It's Aboriginal people got to close the gap themselves. And it's always come down from the top to the bottom, and it doesn't operate that way. Because the program's been brought into our communities, it's not our program, it's government's program. By doing this, especially in my area and my tribe, doing negotiation with North Star, that's give us a chance to mine. Actually, we mine it. So our job is to get talking, especially for me, go and talking to the young people, go and get training. So when the mine is ready, we get our own people to train them up. And so we don't have to be waiting on welfare. We want to be independent and grow as independent, because government always tell us what to do, especially when you get your native title. With the heritage reform as well, they tell you what to do. And yet they don't acknowledge our custom. We buy by that 24/7. And nobody's listen, only we're going to make negotiation better for our next generation. You know, people have been walking 200 years. They kept their law, they kept their culture, and now it's not going to be closing the gap. Only people can close the gap is the Aboriginal people that come from that area. But sometimes you get professors, doctors from different places and professors, they've got their certificate by going to university. But in our own right, our people, myself, other people, we have got a certificate. It's written in the ground, in there, because we're the mother caregivers. That's including for yourself, because you're the mother, you care so much. And we do care about our young people. We want to rise them up. And we want to look after the country like that beautiful one. You know, one day that country is not going to be there. And we want to teach that to a younger generation. So we want to close the gap. And we want to be at the front end from the beginning with this negotiation, because this is one off, first off, and this is our opportunity, and we don't want to lose that opportunity.
Thank you, Doris. And the last question is just over to the left here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Grono from Bougainville Copper, working with Bougainville Copper on the community side. First of all, my question is around gender and violence. So I'd like to acknowledge the house cry that happened last week in PNG. It was incredibly moving and incredibly powerful. And I think a real statement about women saying enough is enough. And my question is really to Doris and to Ume around gender violence. I think there is quite significant evidence, unfortunately, in some impacted communities that mining certainly leads to an increase in gender violence and also to an increase in sex work, and in some countries that link between trafficking and sex work. But my question really is, what would you like to see mining companies do to have a more positive net impact on the reduction of gender violence as a result of their presence in communities? Thank you.
Thank you. Ume, would you like to start?
I said in the morning that there is need for government to put some standards by which the companies and its workers should abide by. We do not have sexual harassment policy yet in the country. We are now working on it, but we don't have one in existence now, so there's a lot of harassments in workplaces, and especially in isolated places where the mines are working. And we do have a lot of sexual violence that we see, especially targeting women and children. And this is why I also said that government need to put that so the workers coming to work there know that there are laws that they need to abide by. So there, we do have, I mean, it's a countrywide, we have that as a problem. But the unfortunate thing that I think is that companies have not taken the initiative through their community development programs to address this, nor have they taken time to invite people to come in to address these issues and provide resources to address these issues in the mining sites. And I'm not talking about the other mines, I'm talking about Western Province. Not right at the mine sites, but the what do you call it, of it is seen throughout the province. And also, I was telling you how children are sold. Many of these children are offsprings from either, young girls getting raped or being sold or getting into relationships with married men, and parents don't want to have children like that. So children like this are sold or killed. And so our government do not have also in place the social protection policies that would enable single mothers like this to take care of their own children. So we do have a lot of gaps that need to be addressed so that we can benefit from minings that are coming, mining industry. But as it is now, our own government have a lot of work yet to do.
Doris, would you like to add anything?
I didn't hear that question.
Just in relation to what mining companies could do to support some of the reduction in violence, sexual violence, domestic violence and the like that comes associated with mining and the like. Where there's anything that you'd be looking for in your community from mining companies. Can mining companies assist your community in dealing with some of the issues that arise associated with, violence, domestic violence and the like for women? Is there anything you would ask of the mining companies to assist?
Yes, we do. With negotiation, when we negotiate, we get some funds and we put that fund aside to help address our own issues.
Okay, thank you, Doris. Look, I'd like to, on your behalf, thank the panel for how open they've been during this segment, the very excellent presentations that we've heard from the panel, and the issues, the real issues that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I also appreciate the input you've provided through the discussion we've had subsequent to that, and I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking all the panel members for their contribution.